This clip from, I guess, Mahler talking about, rape. I don't know what video it's from. Who cares? But this guy is among the, if not the number one content creators, people who push this idea of a Mary Sue, and in particular Ray. He's one of the main culprits. So this is his genius, explanation as to why.
So, to review, her literal flaws are: she wants to find people to love and give her guidance. She believes in the good of people even if they are evil. There is nothing wrong with this heavenly creature. No hardship or cross she has to bear.
You guys seen any problems yet? Or?
Oh, I'm so mad right now.
Is that it? The only way that you can really stop this kind of thing is to arouse public opinion. It's very upsetting. It has a bad moral effect.
Forced adversity.
When I was a kid, it was too much supper. Now it's comic books.
I'll burn them tomorrow.
Bad, B-A-D-D, bothered about Dungeons and Dragons.
Ask yourself, what's more terrifying? Fear or the frightened?
I think there ought to be a law against them. Tonight I'm going to show you why.
So today on Forced Adversity, we are talking about the panic of geek culture. Something that has, over the last couple of decades, really, mostly the last decade, but even before then, a sort of internet culture grew and terminology from different fandoms blended together. This has become the underlying concern about movies and TV shows and comics and video games, and that is Mary Sue.
Oh.
So joining Ryan, Dane, and I today is Little Movie Perp, our secret insider from the film industry.
Hello.
He's Michael Bay.
Top secret
Boom,
Michael Bay.
So if you hear the explosions from his end.
Yeah, all the explosions this week are going to come from Perp. And not from my upstairs neighbor.
Bam. Boom.
That's all he says.
Boom.
Thanks for being here, guys. This is a first, having 4 people, but it's a good one. I couldn't think of 2 extra people I'd rather have. One of which, Ryan, this would be your first, your first time back, right? But also your first as like an official part of the podcast going forward. So welcome.
Yeah, this is a returning guest becoming host.
Yeah, you were so popular that we had to bring you on full time.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna
triple your pay too. We're gonna bring on as a new co-host. It's gonna be crazy. In like
oh god,
2 weeks we're gonna have like 30 people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it means
like a Royal Rumble in a way.
I've got a standard to keep up to now as well, though.
Oh man, you set the standard. Yeah, that's the reason we wanted to have you back is, just editing the thing and listening back to it. It's like, Jesus, this is so much better than, Morgan has gone on to do an excellent job with presenting episodes and stuff. But at that point, I don't know that either one of us could have made that episode half as good as you did. So
yeah, you were the template. I don't know that I could have got what I got done without having your model to go off of. So I really appreciate that.
True.
I'm just worried I'm going to be awful now and you're going to fire me.
Nah. We have a very strong union.
So Mary Sue's, it's a thing. It's a thing, right? Is that a real thing?
Yes. It's a thing that exists. But the term has grown into this word that is used to get people riled up these days from any female character and anything. They'll just slap that name on if someone on the internet doesn't like it.
It's any character. You sure it's not just like badly written ones?
That's subjective, right? Like,
yeah, it's totally subjective. It's weird that people try to put these
But even from the original, how the word started, it gets slapped on characters that it wouldn't apply to. So like a good instance of that is Galadriel from the Rings of Power show. That's a canon Lord of the Rings character. She's in Fellowship of the Ring and the original Silmarillion, which the show draws from. But she can't be a Mary Sue because originally a Mary Sue was a an insert character written into fan fiction. And we can go into the history of how fan fiction came about. But does anyone have any experiences with Mary Sue's or thoughts on the topic?
Well, I'd like to hear more about when you say a self-insert character in fan fiction. That's pretty self-explanatory, but obviously that's not going to apply to all characters in fan fiction or even all self-inserts. You can have a self-insert who isn't a Mary Sue, I would assume.
I feel like it gets pretty weird, because then we're talking about, like, if somebody's saying that a character in a modern big IP story is a self-insert, I mean, for one thing, a good writer is going to draw from, their own perspective and experience to a certain degree anyway.
Yeah.
But, so that kind of makes it like a little weird. But then if we're talking about the IP holder, the people that are, literally have the legal right to make whatever they want with this thing, it can't really apply in the same way as somebody that doing literal fan fiction, right?
Well, you would think that, but now I think the word has been co-opted in a way, and it used to be a pretty narrow thing, and we can get into the secret origin of Mary Sue.
Let's do it.
All right. So back in the late 60s, there was a poorly rated sci-fi show, really niche, that was canceled in 1969 after 3 seasons.
It must have sucked.
It the sets were cheesy. You had a really stiff, stilted speaking lead actor.
Was it and then we're just, wow. I'm pretty good with sci-fi. You think I'd have heard of this by now?
Yeah, it's called Star Trek.
Yeah.
That's a little niche show. I'm sure none of you have seen it.
Nope.
Very little cultural impact.
Yeah, zero cultural impact. No one has talked about it since.
Unrelated, but kind of related is, I know a couple of people we found out last week haven't watched it before, but that's neither here nor there.
What?
I saw J.J. Abrams one.
Saw the J.J. I'm so sorry. No,
that's
two
great.
of those. The first Star Trek movie is fine.
Yeah.
Into Dumbness
is dumb.
It's a bad movie, and it should feel bad.
But the blood.
Yeah, the magic space blood. Yeah,
the blood was cool.
Yeah, it just ruins the stakes for anything in the future after it.
And what was the furry creature? Tribble? What are those?
Tribble, yeah.
Tribbles, yeah.
The Tribbles. There we go.
I mean, it was nice to have the Tribble show up, but that was really a dumb way to do it.
Yeah, Tribble jump scare, Tribble cameo.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
That
said, Star Trek Beyond is a wonderful movie, and if you have not seen it, even if you're not a Star Trek person, it's a great movie.
It's just fucking fun.
I would say the first 10 minutes are a masterpiece within its own little movie. The first 10 minutes, I love it.
It's a great movie, one of my favorite Star Trek movies.
Okay, so I could get into Star Trek then. Okay, good, because I always say that I love the JJ one, the first one, and everyone's like, nah, not real Star Trek. I'm like, okay.
You know how we are about gatekeepers around here.
Yeah,
man?
Sure.
That's why I'm telling you. Yeah, Beyond is it like.
Yeah, I love Beyond.
Beyond's so good. All right, I'm gonna get back on track now.
Well, that kind of applies to the topic, right? The gatekeeper thing. So
this is exactly how we get there. Yep. Because this is gonna evolve into some gatekeeping in a few decades. But so Star Trek gets canceled because nobody's watching it. But some things never change. Like war, nerds never change. And so the show is picked up for syndication. Do you guys know what syndication is?
Yes.
How that works?
Yeah, despite the fact that it's not something we have in the UK, I think I understand it, but...
How are you watching all those Columbo episodes?
Streaming.
We have repeats, but we don't have... Because we only originally had three or four channels, depending on sort of what era you grew up in, for everything.
Huh.
everything was repeated on that specific channel. We didn't have local regions or states, different states in the way that you do. So we've got a national broadcasting for everything. So everyone saw everything pretty much.
Wow.
There was never anything that existed such as syndication. But it has become more of a thing now with satellite television.
Oh, okay. So for those who don't know,
I caught up on Star Trek. Well, to be honest, I've never seen much of the original series. I've seen a handful of episodes. But The Next Generation, I mean, that was airing as I was kind of coming into my nerddom at about 10 years old, and got into comics around the same time, or heavy into comics, taking them seriously. And then on the weekends when I'd stay up later and stuff, they'd have like 2 or 3 episodes of The Next Generation play at night, syndicated. So
So around here it was an episode of DS9 and an episode of TNG, and then eventually it was DS9 and Voyager. Which is fine.
It's fine.
It's the quarter pounder with cheese of Star Trek. It will do, but it's not like a proper meal. So
True.
For those of you who don't know, syndication is a local TV network, a group of TV networks will license a TV show to do reruns. And this was pretty popular at the time. And this was how Star Trek became a hit, because no one watched it when it was actually like airing new. But it was in syndication for years after. We didn't get a new Star Trek thing until after Star Wars, when Paramount was like, oh, wait, sci-fi spaceship things are popular. Maybe we should do a movie. So because of that, you had a booming popular franchise and nothing new for it. And so nerds, like they do, started getting together and making their own stuff. From fan conventions. This is how, like with comic conventions and Star Trek conventions, these were some of the earliest fandom conventions.
Yep.
And we look at how that's blown up over the decades.
Not just that, but the campaign to bring it back was really the first organizational effort of modern fandom at all. Like with an IP, I covered this like in my video a long time ago.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the important thing to note of that, besides the fact that it was the first one, and this is relevant, I think, is the gender of a lot of the people that were driving that.
So this community was mostly female, depending on what era and who you ask. The numbers range from 70 to 90% of the original hardcore.
That would mean women saved Star Trek.
Women saved Star Trek. Yes.
Oh my God.
Can we find sources for this? This is great.
What are they? A bunch of Mary Sues, maybe. Sorry.
Well, to add to that as well, because I was familiar with the original Star Trek actually before I got into TNG, and having watched the original, it sort of put me off. But one of the things that Star Trek did in terms of its appealing to females was that it had a very famous female writer, DC Fontana, who went by DC, I think, to hide the fact that she was a woman.
Yep.
So really, women have been integral to Star Trek from the beginning, and I'm not 100%, so maybe Morgan knows a little bit about this than me, but wasn't Gene Roddenberry's wife heavily involved as well from the start?
Yep, Margelle Barrett was involved even from the unaired pilot, where she served as the original first officer. And one of the things that got the show not picked up with the first pilot was that the suits didn't like this, sort of the second main lead was a woman. So women really have been integral to Star Trek, and she went on to play, for those more familiar with TNG, Lwaxana Troi, Deanna Troi's mother.
Wasn't she also the computer voice?
The voice of the computer for like basically everything until she died.
Yeah.
Well, it seems like Hollywood was really overrun by women in the 60s.
They had to hide their name and not get their show picked up. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it really was frustrating. Like because I didn't learn this until I was doing a lot of, research on just fandom in general and how it evolved overall. And like when I came upon this stuff, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Because the amount of gatekeeping towards women, it's insane. And especially to think that, it would be insane even if it just had been men driving Star Trek all this time. And even if it was just men that were responsible for the fan campaigns back in the 60s and 70s, but it's not. You know what I mean? So it's really almost like it's betraying the roots of Star Trek and what has kept it relevant and even in popular consciousness at all.
Right. It really is a sign of how quickly people take ownership of something that they had no hand in producing.
And I've just remembered, actually, another woman crucial to Star Trek was Lucille Ball.
Yep.
It's her production company, right?
It was her production company that picked it up.
Indeed.
So, they're making Star Trek woke, they're making Star Trek feminist. It always has been, and the people who created it always were. And the only reason that we forget about that is some motherfucker named Rick Berman, who I will not get into today.
Berman.
So, but in these fan communities, they also published fan magazines, which were where fan fiction was originally published. And the fanzines, as they came to be called, were monetized a little bit to sort of recoup the publishing costs, but it was a labor of love rather than a professional magazine. Something like I don't know if it's still around, but back in the day there was the Star Wars Insider magazine that was like an official published magazine with the glossy covers and everything. This was all fan produced, basically made out of people's houses kind of stuff. And this is where fan fiction got started, and it was a labor of love. And so by 1973, we have a wide array of fan fiction in the Star Trek community, and there's some recurring tropes that start to show up. Among these are self-insert characters who are made a central character and are super skilled and well-liked by the crew. And these tropes sort of ingrain themselves in how this is written. And in 1973, we get a parody fan fiction written by a woman named Paula Smith called A Trekkie's Tale. And in this short story, she satires these tropes with a character by the name of Mary Sue, who is like the example of all of these things smushed into one character. I'm pretty sure she dies at the end too. Like it's very cheesy, very silly, and meant to poke fun at the tropes rather than be like this broad condemnation of women in Star Trek. Because why would they? That doesn't make any sense. They were just it was sort of like, wow, there's some repeating themes here. We could stand to do a little better, I guess. Is at least what I took away from it.
So I don't know if you can answer this one, but were the earlier fan fictions or the parody, was the female character specifically a love interest for Kirk? Did they make themselves sort of, was it to do with hero worship of Captain Kirk, or was it to make themselves the hero?
It was a bunch. It is making themselves of a love interest of a particular character, often Spock, or just to be another person in that world that is, but you operating on that same heroic level as these characters you love seeing on the TV screen.
Well, that's interesting because obviously in the show, Kirk is the great lover of women.
Right.
So it's interesting that that wasn't always the main focus.
Spock was a sex symbol.
Yep. Leonard Nimoy, he was the whole thing.
Yeah, Leonard Nimoy hated it so much that he wrote a book that I Am Not Spock.
Then he eventually wrote another one called I Am Spock, I think.
Yeah. And then he went on to come back to do Spock Prime in the JJ movies to bring Perk back into it. That's the old man Spock in the movies you've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, it is kind of interesting I mean, that's kind of what fan fiction's about, though, right? It's like they're taking something that they identify with or that they see in the show that's not exactly in the show, and they're, establishing their own personal narrative connection with it.
Right.
And I'll be honest, I used to think fan fiction was stupid. And I still have zero interest in reading any of it or anything, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've had friends who've written fan fiction, and I've never really had strong opinions one way or the other.
And I think that's kind of the point. Is it's that's for them.
Yeah.
Usually, you know what I mean, or for maybe somebody else who agrees with you or your connection to it. And
right.
Yeah, it's not something that's ever appealed to me. For film and television, really. But then I think, well, maybe in comics, for example, would would I ever consider writing a comic? But then I would use only the existing characters. I wouldn't dream of creating new ones. And maybe that's an example of my lack of creativity, but telling stories with the existing characters. So yeah, it's strange that
it's fun. It's gonna be where you have the most fun. Remember, Dan, remember when I think there was a Kickstarter from one of the Comics Gates guys, and it ended up being something with Han Solo. It's people even them who complain about original characters, they the idea of playing with these toys, is basically what it is at the end of the day, and it's just so much fun, and that's what you want to do. It's oh man, I have such a great take on Darth Vader or Spider-Man. Yeah,
right.
Actually, having said that, I'm going to go back on everything I've just said for me personally, because I've realised that in crime genre, Sherlock Holmes has had a huge amount of essentially fan fiction written.
Yep.
But it's given a lofty title of pastiche.
So Sherlock Holmes was actually the first, real IP fan fiction. I mean, IP fandom, as going back before the Star Trek thing that I mentioned before. The first notable instance was, I believe, whenever Sherlock was killed in one of the novels, I think.
Yes.
And the fans that was the first real fan uproar of no. I forget how that shook out and whether or not it changed anything, but still that's on one of the first moments on the timeline of modern fandom.
I can step in there. He was killed off fairly quickly. It was after the second set of short stories that Conan Doyle wrote. So halfway through the full canon, if you like, he was killed off because Doyle had got bored of writing him and frustrated as well because it was quite hard coming up with ideas. And so he killed him off. And then there was a huge, as you said, a huge fan demand. So he was eventually brought back in quite a clever way, actually.
We're probably, I imagine, going to get into this, Morgan, but that the Sherlock fan fiction thing reminds me of an angle of it that seems common, which is there's apparently a lot of fan fiction about Sherlock and Watson as lovers.
Yep.
And so it seems like there's a bit of a queer angle to.
I didn't quite dig into that part of that as deep for this because it was sort of outside the scope of talking about Mary Sue, but there was a queer shipping between usually Kirk and Spock.
There's also been Captain America and Bucky. I've seen that.
That's true. That's really weird, given like comics Bucky is. So, anyways.
Well, presumably as well, though, if you'll pardon the turn of phrase, there's an opportunity for this kind of sexualized fiction for a self-insert.
Yes.
True.
I get it. I'm a little slow. Self-insert. Wow. Well done, Ryan. Well done.
That was genuine. I wasn't trying to.
I don't think meant it as a joke, but it does serve as one. So well played.
So I'll take it.
You will take it.
You'll take this self-insert. Yes. Where were we at?
Mary Sue.
Oh yeah.
Good old Mary Sue. So life goes on, right? Like we are in the year of our Dark Lord of the Sith, 1973. Actually, before our Dark Lord of the Sith, because Star Wars isn't even out. To give you an idea of like where we are in geekdom, right? We are pre-Star Wars by 4 years. And this term pretty much stays in Star Trek fandom until the early 2000s, as far as I've been able to find out.
Wow.
Like a little bit into the 90s, once you get like bulletin boards and stuff online, but it really becomes more known once we get into the era of Wikipedia and TV tropes, and the term sort of breaks containment from Star Trek fan fiction, and by that point, sort of the broader fan fiction community, you'd see it tossed about, but it sort of stayed in the fan fiction community.
At that point, was the definition the same?
The definition was pretty much the same, sort of super skilled self-insert character that is sort of unreasonably beautiful. So I have some definitions I would like to use. All right, I want to use two definitions here because I think it's important to use two different sources, just to give you an idea of what it has come to mean. And actually,
it might be relevant that I give my experience with the word, because I've heard it here or there, but it really came out in the Force Awakens is when.
Yes.
That's when it's great to. I'm actually learning stuff, and I had no idea about the Star Trek fanfic. Like that was wow.
Yeah, so it goes back, right? I mean, you heard about it in Force Awakens, and we're talking half a century before that. Yeah.
I think I've heard it here, there, but not really like, it's just like it was so honed in on the Force Awakens. But I honestly, it's almost like that Sinbad movie, Genie movie, the Mandela Effect, where it's like, I think I remember hearing about Mary Sue before Force Awakens, but I'm not sure.
Right. But I would say with Force Awakens, it really is where it becomes prominent. And we're going to talk about Rey in a little bit. So I'm gonna read three definitions. I'm going to read the dictionary.com definition for something very scholarly. And then two from our good friends at the Urban Dictionary, not very scholarly, but I think interesting. So, Mary Sue. Mary Sue is a term used to describe a fictional character, usually female, who is seen as too perfect and almost boring for lack of flaws, originally written as an idealized version of an author in fan fiction. So that's the dictionary.com definition. Fan fiction character, originally, too perfect, boring, lacks flaws. Pretty simple, right? So I'm going to read you now the 2005 definition of what Mary Sue is, according to Urban Dictionary. So this is, I wanted to grab this specifically because Perp has honed in on something about Force Awakens. Definition. A female fanfiction character who is so perfect as to be annoying. The male equivalent is the Marty Stew, often abbreviated to Sue. A Mary Sue character is usually written by a beginning author. Often the Mary Sue is a self-insert with a few improvements For example, better body, more popular, etc.
Mm.
The Mary Sue character is almost always beautiful, smart, etc. In
Oh.
short, she is the, quote, perfect girl. The Mary Sue usually falls in love with the author's favorite characters and winds up upstaging all the other characters in the book, series, or universe. And they go on to list different subcategories of Mary Sue. So
Yeah.
the 2005 definition here, added by Urban Dictionary editors, so fucking nerds, is all about the fan fiction, right? So to see where we're coming from originally in a more civilized age.
Before the Empire.
Before the Empire. Before the Dark Times. All right. I'm going to use a definition from February 2021. Mary Sue. Definition. The main character of the new Mulan and the Star Wars sequels.
Man, they just cut right.
Mulan.
You got to give them that.
I love it. I love that they said in the new Mulan.
Right.
It's almost like an afterthought. Oh
Because
yeah,
it's
and that
so
new
different
one.
from the old Mulan.
Well, that's what I was going to question, because obviously the first two definitions make a point of sort of suggesting that it is fan fiction or perhaps an author just starting out. Because if you apply the vague latter definition to the earlier definitions of a character that is too perfect and too capable and a self-insert, that really applies to a lot of fictional characters that are now beloved.
Well, yeah, I have something I was gonna talk about here for a minute, if I may do a thing.
Fire away.
So I want to talk about a character in Star Wars.
Sure.
It pretty much fits this description.
Okay.
Self-insert. Okay. This is a character in Star Wars that the creator said, I'm going to put myself in this role as the awesome adventurer who can do no wrong. You know, character with strength and power that isn't justified, no major flaws, and it's lacking in realism. So the character I'm talking about is Luke Skywalker.
Right. Farm boy, desert kid, kind of whiny, but like
when you apply any of that, if you were to apply it consistently, you've got in A New Hope, Luke is surrounded by Tusken Raiders who knock him out and almost kill him. And then Obi-Wan saves him, scares the Raiders away, showing Luke doesn't have the combat experience or the training to protect or save himself. You know, like if he had any kind of experience, he would have, been aware that he was in danger even. You know, that the Tusken Raiders are out there, and considering he lives on fucking Tatooine, he should know that. And I think he even mentioned something about it, but he's not keeping his guard up.
Right.
You know, it's not something an experienced warrior would do or something. By the end of the movie, he's without a targeting system, blowing up the Death Star. Based on his
torpedoes.
skills.
Yeah, he makes torpedoes go at a hard right angle, right? Just just like that's with his brain.
He's able to outlast attacks from stormtroopers, even Darth Vader, who has spent years in combat training. The rescue of Leia, that was a success. That was all. They were just winging that.
Yeah.
None of this is stuff that is, and let me be clear, I don't care about any of that. I love that movie, and I love that all these things happen, because that's the point of a fantasy adventure movie, is that the hero is going to do the thing that nobody else could possibly do. That's why they're the hero, and that's why we're focusing on them in this story.
I even have a contemporary example of a very popular character, very popular, that came out. I first saw the movie in 2017. So right about the same time as The Last Jedi, or not The Last Jedi, Force Awakens. I love this movie. Your main character is seeking a peaceful life, but cannot avoid the call to adventure when it touches their home. They are seemingly capable of defeating any foe using any weapon they pick up and overcoming impossible odds. And despite being a loner, they are well respected by everyone who is not trying to kill them, and even some who are. They are allowed to bend rules that others are not, despite them being held as immutable. This character is seen to befriend animals that are hostile to others and use vehicles they steal immediately and expertly. Their name is Baba Yaga, or to their friends, John Wick.
Yeah. Good movies.
It's really good movies.
All of them are pretty good.
And just off the top of my head, thinking of characters that are far too powerful, far too sort of good-looking and strong, good at everything they turn their hand to. The two that immediately spring to mind for me are Superman, who was a character that was so powerful they had to invent kryptonite.
Yep.
And James Bond, who is a huge self-insert character when you look at the history of Ian Fleming, who was essentially a spy. Oh, I'm sorry I took your spy. Your pick. Do you want to expand on that?
No, that James Bond. No, I'm just a huge fan. No, you please continue. Actually, more.
Yeah, I mean, Ian Fleming was in the Secret Service during the Second World War and was a spy. And I don't think he did that much in terms of actual on-the-ground spying. I think he was. I mean, he certainly did some. But he worked in the office quite a lot as well. And so a character that is purely in the field, who is desperately handsome, attractive to women, every woman he meets. And really in the first few, certainly probably the first half dozen novels, is basically flawless. He doesn't really have any emotion towards any of the women he's with. He has pretty strict morals of right and wrong, and he can achieve anything. So,
well, this kind of directly relates to a Critical Drinker video, where I think it's called like "Why Modern Movies Suck Because They Hate Men." Is the name of it. And he's giving all these examples. I think, I was getting legit angry. I don't think I've ever been that angry on stream before, like just triggered. And, not because I wish I could say it was because he was being like a brazen homophobe or something. That stuff upsets me, but I'm kind of used to it, sadly. But with this, it's like the way he was framing things, the way the words he's using, and then the images he's showing on screen. I realized in the moment, he's doing this on purpose. Like, this is not just an idiot that, you know what I mean, doesn't know what he's talking about. Like, you have to be intentionally deceitful to do this. But, like, he's using James Bond as an example of, one of the men who he's been made into a weak man who pines over a woman he lost years ago. Like, James Bond didn't do that before.
What?
And, yeah. He's saying that Daniel Craig is like an effeminate, kind of like just a pussy, basically, is what he's implying. And it's like, did you watch these movies? Daniel Craig
Bond has
all the other
James
previous
Bond
James Bonds at once.
He's so stupid. It crossed over from actors.
Yeah,
it crossed over.
Yeah, from George Lazenby's James Bond. His wife dies at the end, and then he throws the fucker down like a smokestack in the next movie off a fucking helicopter. And it was
not in the next movie. It's actually several movies later. Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's
for your eyes only. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But who's watching that video and thinking, oh yeah, they did make Daniel Craig weak, not like the other James Bond.
Yeah. The thing that I wanted to tie together with these though is that the idea that there seems to be this, and I guess I need to come up with a more specific term, but it's like they grandfather in certain things to their viewers. So, like, if it happened before they came of age, basically, if it was a Alien or Aliens, where Ripley is a fucking badass and she's surviving, she's able to do the right thing at the right moment. She's the only one that's able to survive against this alien that's killing all the space marines and stuff like that. Then they accept that as being like, that's the good way. That's the way it should be done. It's something that is made after they're, I guess, I don't know if it's like after they've become, kind of indoctrinated by this kind of content about wokeness and feminism and stuff, that can be basically the same thing. Like Prey is a recent example.
Yeah.
The Predator movie Prey, where it's a woman. And in fact, in Prey, as we talked about on stream, characters, it's shown. There's a lot of justification for why she's able to do the stuff she's doing, and she also doesn't even do it all by herself. Her brother helps her out and stuff like that. In a lot of ways, it's more realistic than other things that they might take for granted, like Ripley or something. But and so there's this weird disconnect that they have where it's just they're able to justify past examples in ways that I can't comprehend how they're able to do that. But
I have a theory, a hypothesis. We attach to the stories we enjoy, right? Even if we don't know why, right? Even if we never analyze exactly what about it that we attach to them, and we kind of take personal ownership of them. And so I'm going to use a recent Star Trek example of Discovery, where your central character is a Black woman. So if you grew up on Trek and your central character is a white male or a Black male, and you don't really think about it, right? It's just the captain's a badass, and you get Janeway, and Janeway has had a lot of detractors over the years. I don't like Janeway all that much, but I know why that is, because I've looked into like what the production of that show was like. It was Berman. But you're used to just sort of identifying yourself with Star Trek broadly growing up. People who grew up on the TNG era shows. And you get to Discovery. So we haven't had a Star Trek show since Enterprise. We haven't had Star Trek movies for a few years.
No new Star Trek characters, because the movies we got were
all the main cast were old characters. Yeah, were just recasts. So to have this central figure be this Black woman in a time where racial tension is kind of on the rise, not that it's ever gone away.
It was being exploited a lot more explicitly. Yeah.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That fantasy you sort of see yourself as attached to doesn't look the same anymore. And the continuity doesn't feel the same. And you start to, as soon as that crack is there, right? That your attachment is now damaged in some way. And it's a you problem. It's 100% a you problem.
Yeah.
And like you start to notice all the flaws, and some of those were always there. There are flaws in Discovery that were in Enterprise and in the original series because they're just part of how you tell a Star Trek story. Why does the main cast have to go on the away missions? Well, because it's a Star Trek story.
Mm-hmm.
But you associate those now with Discovery because that's the bad one in your brain. That's the one that broke the illusion.
So it's like it activates a sense of awareness that you didn't use before. Right. That's a good, I agree. That seems to be what it is. Like there's whereas before you could just, they could just like, sit back and watch an adventure play out or whatever and accept all the ridiculous leaps in logic and absurdity you have to, the techno mumbo jumbo that Star Trek relies on. Whereas now I've seen them with Discovery and such, I've seen them kind of pick apart that techno babble that has never been like, sure, they might start with this is a theoretical concept that exists as like a theory. And then they go from there and just create something absurdly nonsensical with it, but it makes the story do what it needs to do.
Yeah.
But I've seen them picking that apart now too in, the era of New Trek. And I think that somewhat extends from that same thing, right?
Yeah. And you see it in other fandoms. Like with Star Wars, when they got rid of the expanded universe before Force Awakens came out, when they said, we're not telling new stories there. Any stories we're telling, these are the things that count, right? It's the movies and the Clone Wars and the other cartoon show. And that's Star Wars now, right? As far as what new stories we're going to tell are going to build off those things.
They got really mad about that, I remember.
They got very mad. And I loved a lot of those stories, but a lot of them are awful.
Well, so, and the main thing is they were fan fiction.
They,
essentially they were like, it was, there were some real novelists and authors that were writing that stuff, but like
Yeah.
It wasn't George Lucas wasn't directing them exactly what to do and
Right.
how the adventure should play out. He was giving them some pretty free reign.
Yeah, it was kind of authorized fan fiction, and the rule was, and there was a case where an author got pretty upset about this. The rule was is your stories are canon until they're not, right? If George wants to do something different, then that's canon now. And with the Clone Wars, there was a writer who was writing Clone Wars stories, who the cartoon show contradicted her books, and she stopped writing for Lucas Publishing because she was upset about that, which I understand, right? You've put all this time and effort in, and it's just like, oh, that doesn't count now. I can see being, how you get there, but
I think the other.
Oh, go ahead.
I think the other thing is that all those stories still exist. When they deleted canon, they didn't delete the stories, and really, it's a smart move on their part because it's saying that by not making it canon, the new stuff is able to contradict it without a million voices saying, well, that couldn't have happened because this happened in this, which is the problem that Rings of Power had that people can't seem to get over, is that it's not the books.
It's definitely not the movies.
Well, no, things are going to be different.
Yeah.
It's and you can accept Rings of Power as canon if you want, but you can also ignore it if you want. It's always confused me how people get set in their minds that something has to be true in a completely made up world.
It's the same thing in superhero movie, the MCU, for example. Just pretty much every movie that comes out or show, you're going to see or hear somebody say, well, that's not the way it happened in the comics or whatever. It's like, yeah, I know, but that's a good thing. It's like, I know a lot about what happens in the comics. I'd like to be surprised.
Right. I have a great example of that, about like, it's not like the comics, but the movie was better. And it's not even a MCU movie I like all that much, and that's Age of Ultron. The movie is fine. I like it, but it's not like my favorite. But the Age of Ultron event comic was terrible.
Well, to be specific, that was specifically as an editorial mandate to write that for Bendis. Bendis was told to write that.
Yeah.
Kind of at the last minute because they just wanted to have a book on the shelves that matched the name.
Right.
And it's pretty obvious. There's no connection other than Ultron is in it.
Yeah, it's such a bad comic. Anyways, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was thinking like this is why it's awesome. Sort of almost like growing up in a horror diet, because those franchise, like, you had to get used to, like, Halloween. How many versions of Halloween? How many, like, remember Jason Goes to Hell? Remember all that door opened, and it's Jason. It's like it's each individual like movie was its own thing from the very beginning. It was just understood, and it was fun because of that.
I think that's a really great point. I think people who are familiar with horror don't have any of these issues because horror messes with the canon.
Yeah.
In every film, practically every sequel. I'm thinking Evil Dead 2 is the first 5-10 minutes is a remake of Evil Dead 1, and it happens completely differently, even though it's a sequel. And then they do the same thing again in Army of Darkness.
Yeah.
Is it just like an entitlement thing? That it has to be this way. This is and why is it such a? I don't know.
I have theories on this. And I've developed this more as I've sort of gotten back into Warhammer the last year or so. So I sort of took time off after I got married, and then the pandemic had me painting again. So now I'm sort of doing it again, and now I'm actually playing again because now we're out in the wilderness. And 40K, kind of like horror, the canon is a central tenet of the 40K canon is that every story told is told from someone's perspective, and that perspective can be wrong, it can be a lie, it can be propaganda. So nothing is really completely believable, and nothing should be taken as in quotes true. But there's a lot out there, right? Every Army book has dozens of pages on characters and events, and they write novels that are about different wars and different people. And so there is people who sort of their connection to 40K is all of this lore. But part of their personality, the sort of connection they have is knowing all this stuff, right? We're the Star Trek connection that broke for people was like, well, now I don't see myself as part of this adventure. For them, it's, well, they changed the lore. Now I don't connect to it the same way. And now I start to see all the flaws. I think it is a feeling entitled to something that is unchanging and you know everything about, right? Like you sat there and read the Star Wars wiki, for 10 hours a day. And now they're going to reboot the continuity. So you kind of feel like you wasted all that time, right? Like, but they're, as Ryan said, you can still read those books, and actually they're still publishing them. Like you can go to Barnes and Noble or wherever, and like half the Star Wars section, there's a big Star Wars section, is just reprints of the older books. They just did a bunch of the old Star Wars X-Wing books. They did new unabridged audiobooks for the first 5.
Wow.
And those are some of my favorite Star Wars books.
Yeah.
And they were written by hero of the show, Mike Stackpole, whose report on Bad was instrumental in our D&D episode.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's another example of like, and I ask if it's entitlement because I kind of feel like it is, but I wanted you guys' opinion. But that's what I say on my channel. I've been saying for quite a while that I think it is, and
I think that goes to it. I don't necessarily think that's
no, it's not the entirety of it. No, it's,
and I think when you say entitlement, it's different to how you mean in other contexts. In that people feel entitled to sort of to feel like they're being told the truth, if you like, because. Going back to the Sherlock Holmes example, the difference between the TV version that you mentioned and what happens in the book, in the Benedict Cumberbatch version, they made the conscious decision never to explain how he did it, and so they made how he did it unexplainable, and that left a lot of people unsatisfied.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, if you can accept that it's something that will never be explained, then you can either get over it or get annoyed by it. And so I think there's an element of...
That's what I mean, though, is that like you may not like it, but feeling like you are owed it to be explained because you relate to the show in this specific way. That's what I see as entitlement. Like to me, to be, like it is. Like I wish they would explain, but at the same time, like I'm not gonna become a angry, bitter asshole online about it. You know what I mean? And that's really where I guess the real difference comes in, I guess.
Well, I also wonder how much other cultural influences play, because I was thinking. I grew up on the Warner Brothers cartoons, for example, as I'm sure you guys may or may not have done.
Which ones are those? What are those?
Like the Looney Tunes?
Yes, the Looney Tunes shorts. Yeah, so Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, all of those. And there was never any continuity.
There's no continuity.
No, they're single episodes that sometimes the main character will die at the end of it. Right.
And they're back to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. So if your cultural influences teach you that sometimes the ongoing story matters, sometimes it doesn't, sometimes tiny details matter, sometimes they don't, the important thing is as a whole the story any good? I wonder if that plays a part in it, because the sort of the cliche or the stereotype of nerd culture for a long time was that sort of comic book geek thing of the comic book guy in The Simpsons when he
the know-it-all.
Yeah, when he asks in the episode, the Halloween episode where he kidnaps Lucy Lawless, and then he's quizzing her on all of these continuity errors or why this doesn't make sense because of something that happened in an episode at the beginning in series 1, and that's always been a part of it as well.
Right. That's an old problem, and it's never gone away. And I think with something, no one likes to be told they're wrong. And I think when you make that so central to how you interact with what you enjoy, well, now, if you're to touch on another one, if you've been reading a lot of DC comics in the early 2000s, and then Flashpoint happens, and now we're on to the New 52, and everything except for Green Lantern is rebooted.
Batman.
And Batman.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, I actually was kind of reading some at that point, but I was also mostly reading Green Lantern and Batman because those were the ones
so
that
good.
really well. And so those were the ones that, somewhat understandably, they were like, we'll just leave those alone. But meanwhile, we're going to completely change everything else.
Yeah, I was reading those, and I was reading Action Comics, and
Aquaman didn't. I only read the Batman, Batgirl, and the Aquaman didn't feel rebooted either. Did you read the Aquaman?
I did not.
New
know.
52? Yeah, a lot of the stuff in the movie, the James Wan movies in there, sort of.
Huh.
Yeah.
I have not read that.
No, I guess it's like it becomes a matter of like how you. So you said, a minute ago, Ryan, it depends on if it's a good story or not. So as Perp and I explored recently, with good writing, bad writing, and then one of the most common comments that I've gotten, and I did a kind of snarky video about this like almost 2 years ago now, is one of the most common things I've heard is like, we don't hate this or that. We just want good stories. It's like, I can't tell you how many times I've gotten just that as a comment. And, you'll see it anywhere you go. And it's like, okay, well, who doesn't want good stories, right? Like, so the question becomes, what are you seeing as a good story? And why are you thinking this is just inherently bad? And why all these things that I think actually are usually pretty damn good, you're thinking they're bad stories. And so it kind of just started me down this whole path of subjectivity in this stuff, and like our subjective connections to this, and like, what do we even have in mind for what a good story is? And typically the people that say that, when you get down into what they're thinking a good story is or a bad story is, it's not something I can get on board with,
No, it's what's a good story to you. And different,
right.
Some stories will resonate with a lot of people, and those become very successful. Some won't, and they'll become less successful. But does that mean they're bad?
So I have an observation. I think it's about, for that type of people, the we just want good stories crowd, it's what doesn't trigger that cognitive dissonance I've sort of built this whole theory around, right? Like,
interesting.
Because they really just, when they say they just want to turn their brain off and enjoy something, I take them at their word. They actually just want to do that. But now, because they're aware, they've become woke to these issues, right? But not issues really, but these things that are just sort of their part of storytelling, but now they're aware of it and it bothers them. They just want something that they can turn off their brain. And I think that's why they glommed onto the new Top Gun movie, which is just kind of the old Top Gun movie with 90% less homoeroticism, which they were young, so they don't really remember the homoeroticism.
That's a bummer. I was really hoping they would like crank it up.
Right? Just like such a wasted Tom Cruise.
It is a sequel. They're supposed to do everything the original did, but times.
Exactly. Perp, tell them to make a reshoot of it. We're going to start a petition to make the gay Top Gun remake. That's
Bottom Gun.
Bottom Gun.
Bottom cut.
Talk about self-inserts.
Hey-o.
From my experience, every time I ask them, like, well, what's a good story? I get a list of stuff. What should it be?
Right.
Not this. Well, it's not this. It's not this. It's not that. It's not that. So,
well, tell me what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a kind of thing like, I don't know what it is, but I know what it isn't. It's and that's, you know, the joke you made, I think, when we were talking about this perp was like, that was the what kind of what the Supreme Court justice said about porn at one time, right? Like I don't anyway.
Want to see it.
No one want to see it. And that's not really a way to consume stuff. Like, you think about if you're going out to dinner at a nice restaurant or whatever, and you're like, I like my food very specific. I'm like, okay, how would you like it? I don't know. I can't tell you I like it, but I'd like you to bring it to me, and then I will tell you if it's right or wrong.
Right. Good luck, nerd.
Yeah. So,
and I think that what the moral panic centers around here, to bring us back to moral panics. This was we were trying to get here. This is where we're going with this. So for people who are like, this is not about moral panics, it absolutely is. We just had to explain it all. So thank you for bearing with us. Once you have that chink in your perception of media, right? And there is an industry, as Dane and Perp and Ryan talk about on other mediums that I'm not involved with. I'm not jealous. I actually have no time for it anyways, even if I wanted to, and I don't. I'm happy to just do this. But the people they talk about push all these narratives about women in media. And they've provided a perpetrator to these people who feel victimized by a more diverse media ecosystem. And you can really see how they perceive things when you compare something side by side that are pretty similar, which is why I wanted to talk about John Wick. Because when you put them, like, they're both contemporaries of each other, and their characters are both kind of superheroes, right? Rey is a space wizard. John Wick's an Uber assassin. And when you break it down, Perp, tell me if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong here, I will just cop to it. As far as popular movies go, because you're the movie industry expert here, like the last 40 years.
Not an expert fan, big fan,
right?
And I work in it. I work in a couple projects and stuff.
Have you ever seen Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen? He's an expert.
I can hear my spouse in the background. Don't talk about that movie. It's the bad one.
Yep, the only one.
Yeah, sorry. But that's, we've had this discussion. The last 40 or so years worth of movies are kind of just aping off of Star Wars for popular movies. Is that a fair assessment?
There's a thing that, movies like Star Wars or Jaws change things up. I think Jaws is more from summer blockbuster, like, oh, this is what, getting everyone together at this time is going to provide results. But Star Wars just captured imaginations.
Right.
And I've heard something. I've heard a lot from different sources and just like fan magazines, and my favorite reviewers say something similar to Star Wars changed things, and everyone at the end of the day wants to be Star Wars. Something similar like that.
Okay.
Sure.
I mean, you look at the MCU; it's essentially a big Star Wars kind of thing. It's obviously done things, taken it further in a lot of ways, but generally it's building on the structure, the foundation that was built by Star Wars.
Yeah. This is like Freud, looking at it from a Freudian, like, almost movie perspective. Like, it's like deep, we don't mean like, oh, every movie, like, you got males trying to be Star Wars, we don't mean it like that.
Right. Oh. But just like on a broad.
Yeah.
The broad.
What everyone's looking for, what everyone wants, like, more or less, like, that's what we want. Everyone wants the next Star Wars.
Everyone. So, that is sort of how we, how the last 40 years of movies have been. And because of that, there's a lot of shared tropes and storytelling beats, and writers assume that we're all smart enough to just pick up that the hero is going to do the hero stuff, and that the amount of explanation they have to do isn't a ton, because at the end of the day, James Bond's going to kill a guy, right? Like, that's going to be fine. Yeah. There's sort of that uncritical repetition that amusingly works as a great way to farm endless content without ever having to prove a damn thing. Because you can just call it a Mary Sue, right? And because it looks like Star Wars for popular media, for sci-fi and fantasy and stuff, right? They take notes from Star Wars, and you can just endlessly apply that to any female character, whether it's, you know, Rey, or pick an MCU female character, or anybody, right? Any female character in a movie, you can just pick the same flaws that are in every action movie hero, every sci-fi hero, and they all kind of share the same set of like movie quirks, and go, that's why they're a Mary Sue.
Well, so even if, like, I mean, no, I fully agree. But like, I was thinking just now about, so let's say that Rey was kind of ground zero for this modern, you know, incarnation of what a Mary Sue is seen as, right?
Yeah.
Since then, though, I would think there's been a kind of a meta effect. Like, even if I give benefit of the doubt, they're like, okay, I kind of see that you, you know, what you just described actually really is helping me. You're kind of breaking my mind here a little bit, Morgan. And I'm going to think about how I'm going to incorporate this into content for my channel, because like, you're helping me see it in a way that is not as cut and dry as like, it's just sexism. Even though, I mean, it is, because it is in the like unconscious bias version, but not the I hate women version. You know what I mean?
Right.
And there is a subtle distinction. The effect is essentially the same. And I'll, you know, I'm always going to make sure to say that, but it's, yeah. So like, but I still think that after Rey set this new fucking paradigm of how people look at this stuff, then you've got people looking for.
Right, exactly. Now everyone's looking for, it's that, you know, to go back to Discovery, it's that like that break in the connection, right? Now you've seen it, and now you can't unsee it, and you are already predisposed to not liking that, right? Like, because obviously,
and I believe Force Awakens was 2015, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, the next year Ghostbusters comes out and nails it, and that's it. Everyone's already kind of primed, right?
Right.
And Ghostbusters comes in and
I think that's why these
destroys
people
destroys minds everywhere.
Oh gods. Sorry for cutting you off.
No, that was it. That was it. No,
the
way you said, the way you framed that made me think. It's like, yeah, when Rey people start seeing, it's like, yeah, and now of course, and that was just like the match, right?
Even when those things that we were talking about is like, that's in a lot of movies where it's like this logical flaw that we just kind of don't notice otherwise. Even whenever those don't exist, even whenever they, you know, a show or movie puts in effort to, you know, puts in the extra work to say, no, this character is justified in being this good or whatever, they still will call it that. An example being Kate Bishop in the Hawkeye show.
Oh yeah, they really go out of their way to be like, oh no, she is this good. And then that only serves as evidence that she is a Mary Sue. And like,
even though it gives way more reason for her being as good as she is. And by the way, like
more than actual Clint Barton gets.
She barely survives her first fight, by the way. You know, like she's getting attacked by dude. Yeah, she manages to get one in the head with a wine bottle and get away. But like, otherwise, she was pretty close to biting
getting got.
You know, the first time we see her shoot an arrow, she makes a big mistake, you know, and blows up the thing or whatever, knocks the bell down, I think. But like, yeah, it goes out of their way to show she's not perfect. She was trying really hard. You know, she does have experience in you know, martial arts. She's won some trophies, but that is something that real girls and women do all the time.
Right.
It's not even fantastical to have that. Yeah, but meanwhile, Clint Barton never explained how he got as good as he is. You know, we just take it for granted.
In fact, the most human he is in that show, when like, oh yeah, all these superheroics, when it's just a dude doing them. Well, now he's lost his hearing.
Yeah, costing him.
Right, you get to see the cost, and I actually like that show a lot from that angle.
Same with new Captain America.
And the Captain America musical, traumatizing.
For my own benefit, perhaps you can explain if I'm right or wrong with this. In terms of the chronology of it, is that the term gets created and it's very specific. It applies to a very specific thing.
Right.
And then that term sort of doesn't really catch on because it's a term in a niche sort of community.
Yeah, it's a niche community of a niche community, right? You're talking about not just geeks, right, but fan fiction writers.
And then later on, as that niche community grows, thanks to the internet,
yep,
and more people become aware of the term, it still pretty much is specific.
Yep.
But then later on again, the description is broadened significantly to cover many things that aren't included in the original definition.
Correct.
And that sort of, is that where we are now, where it is being applied as broadly as it is?
Right, it is. That's where we're at now, is that this term is applied very broadly to things that don't come close to meeting that original definition. And to
like an add-on.
Right.
It just feels
it just gets mentioned really. It's like an addition. It's like She-Hulk is this, that, and a Mary Sue, and like it's just like, so
because it feels to me like that's pretty much very similar, parallel to Moral Panics in the way they start.
Well, I was just gonna note. I was just making some notes about that. Like, well, I mean, it's something that would really probably be good for the end of the episode, Morgan. So if you want to let me know when that is.
Sure. So to come back to Ray comes over my notes a few times. Talking about like Kate Bishop and how they go out of their way to explain how she's able to do what she does. Force Awakens shows way more about what Rey's capable of than A New Hope does with Luke. Your first scene is she is like rappelling herself down this crashed Star Destroyer, and she beats up those two guys with her staff and like does all these things we see before her big hero moment at the end.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that the rappelling into the Star Destroyer to dismantle machinery in it that she knows she has to understand what it is because she's taking it to sell it.
Right? So she has a lot of technical expertise.
Whenever I've seen people say, "How does she know how to pilot a ship?" It's like, well, you kind of probably would figure a few things out.
Her day job is taking apart ships to sell them. Of course, she knows ships.
I love that. It's
and
like
then
the Star Wars version of a Tomb Raider.
Yeah.
Let's look at what Luke's experience was before he went and joined the rebellion, right? Yeah, he was a whiny. He was pretty whiny. You got to admit that. Oh, I want to go to Tashi Station. Power converters. And so let's see. He's a farm boy, big dreams of becoming a pilot and joining the academy. He's fairly sheltered. Like his, aunt and uncle Baru, they didn't even want to let him go into freaking town. He's got a guardian looking out for him, which was Obi-Wan, rescuing him from peril. Suddenly, he's thrust into this hero role, and he doesn't have like any difficulty adapting. You basically just have Obi-Wan explaining the backstory of this stuff to him, and then here's a lightsaber. Practice with it for like 2 minutes of screen time. And then by the end of it, as we know, like based on shooting womp rats back home,
right,
he's able to, pilot alongside these fucking, experienced pilots. And it's just the two distinctions there. It couldn't be more distinct as far as like how much effort they go through to show. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then like his big hero moment is he blows up the Death Star. And they gave that moment in Force Awakens to Poe, who blows up the Starkiller base.
An actually experienced pilot.
And her big hero moment is she kind of beats up a guy with a sucking chest wound. Like, forgive me for being a little underwhelmed there, but like, the guy just shot guy up by a railgun.
Yeah.
And we see Chewbacca blow up whole groups of stormtroopers with that thing the whole fucking movie.
He's blasting them across the fields and shit. One hits them and they fly like 100 feet.
They fly off into the distance, a whole group of them. So
if anybody's a Mary Sue in that situation, it's Kylo.
It's Kylo. That's right. How are you alive? You ate a railgun to the chest. And you see like the drops of blood on the snow. They make a very clear point of, look how wounded he is. And she doesn't like defeat him. She doesn't fight him off, the ground breaks apart because Plo blew up the planet. Not a big heroic moment. But that's the thing that these people are like, oh, she's a Mary Sue. She beat up Kylo with no training and
See,
she fought a wounded guy and didn't lose. Congratulations.
See, that's kind of different than what we were just talking about, where like they are seeing things they didn't notice before, because in this case they're not seeing things.
They're not seeing things, right?
They should.
And like I will talk about my moment with Star Wars when my brain had that break. Because it was after I learned firearm safety and started shooting with my grandfather at the range and going hunting and stuff up north. And there's the move, and one of the things they teach you about guns very early is you don't look down the barrel of a firearm, even if you know it's unloaded, because you could be wrong and it could be loaded. And that's how you shoot your brain out. And I rather like having a brain. There's the scene in A New Hope where Obi-Wan gives Luke the lightsaber, and like the first thing he fucking does is look down the lightsaber. And that was the moment I'm like, Luke Skywalker's an idiot. And
yeah,
I was fine.
There's edits and like GIFs and stuff that people have done where it like comes out and like just goes through his head.
Goes through his head, right?
I'm a big Luke fan in general. So can I just give you one cool thing that I thought back in the day?
Sure.
Okay, so when I first saw Star Wars, I thought Luke was super nice to the droids, and he was like the only one that like actually saw them as like almost like people, and he was talking to them and the way he was like saying, versus like, because they never really showed like everyone else, the way they would interact with droids is exactly how you would expect in like your average like sci-fi thing. And to see Luke like chill with that, it wasn't until later on like there's a lot of people that actually treated droids like people, but I
that
always
Luke
thought
is the
was...
first one you see, and the only one in the original trilogy who's like, no, the droids are people.
Well, I mean, that does establish that he's a good dude. Like he's, and I hope you don't think that we're like sitting here shitting on Luke.
We need to say one positive thing. That's it. That's all.
No, I love.
And that's
Luke
a really
Skywalker.
Positive thing. Yeah. But
I love him. He's one of my favorite characters ever. It's just when we're comparing, using the same standards is all we're doing.
For sure.
I also like Rey, so it's.
Yeah. I love Rey.
Yeah, Rey's great.
Here I'm defending Rey. Rey's all right. I'm kind of mid. Like, I don't hate her, but like he's fine.
Yeah, standard character. It's how I felt about like Captain Marvel. It's just like it's a standard origin. Not the best, not the worst. It's just like okay, standard movie. Can't wait for the second one. That's gonna kill it. Like
Oh yeah, that looks good.
There's nothing that Rey does that isn't at least shown as being something Luke does. But then. And then once I hate to bring the final movie in the trilogy out into this, but it is canon, unfortunately.
Let's do it. I could steel man everything.
All right.
So, no, this is actually a good thing that I'm giving points to Rise of Skywalker for once.
Oh, great.
In defense of Rey, because one of the complaints that I've seen is that she's just too powerful. How she's so powerful when what I mean? Well, because she's a clone of the Emperor.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, half clone.
Half clone. Yeah, but I mean, she's got Emperor blood, so that's all you really need to,
to say. And she was wrestling with that. She couldn't control her power. Like it was like that was the whole movie. She didn't know how to do anything with it.
But do we know how many midichlorians she had?
12.
No, that's the one problem. It's a bit glaring flaw in that trilogy. They don't really tell us any midichlorians of anything. Yeah. Which really is the heart and soul of the Star Wars franchise, is those fucking midichlorians.
I'm canceling you for that take.
I noticed there was a big crickets after I said that.
I'm going to start a moral panic.
I was trying to think of what could be a worse answer. I was like, pod racing? No, that's pretty cool.
Pod racing is wizard.
Yeah, it's wizard. It's a travesty that we never got more midichlorians, pod racing, and wizard.
That's true. We never got another pod racing thing, huh?
We could do with more pod. I like the pod race.
Well, it clearly established that little kid was an excellent pilot. It doesn't really explain how he became an excellent pilot. But
just that he is, It's all you need to know, right? You don't need to tell how he is. Here's the demonstration. He is an excellent pilot. Watch him do this race. Also, Days of Pod Racing when?
That's the underlying thing about all these Star Wars movies and all these characters, right? Is there's this one element that explains everything because that's what it was written to do.
Right.
The Force. If they're good at anything, no matter what it is, it can be explained by the Force because the Force is in everything and blah, blah, blah. And so, like, if you're talking about, a little kid can drive a pod, whatever, better than anybody, then it's explained by the Force, and there's an explanation for it. And to try and act like it's supposed to adhere to some kind of realistic standards is misunderstanding the entire franchise, I think.
Yeah. So I think the next time, if you're listening and you love calling Rhea Mary Sue, hey, how did you make it this far? I'm so proud of you.
Congratulations. Really
good work. The next time you think to call a character a Mary Sue, stop and think. Are they more over the top than John Wick? Because we all love John Wick. We just talked a while ago about how much we loved it and how much we love Luke Skywalker. Like, is it crazier than that? Because if it's not, maybe look inward. Maybe realize that your perception is different than it was a minute ago, and reanalyze your life. Rethink your life. Don't do death sticks.
Don't do them. I mean, this kind of ties into, not to self-congratulate, but I've made a lot of content about things around this topic. So I did that bit about perspective, and that's really kind of one of the underlying, the foundational things about how I see this stuff is that, and you touched on that. That's what I'm saying. You kind of broke my brain. You're causing me to somewhat reevaluate the way I look at this, or at least add a little more nuance to it, because it really is just about a perspective that's not their own, our own. You know what I mean? Like, I notice it whenever there's a character like, a black character or something, and there's some kind of element about racial inequality that comes into it. It's like, well, that's noticeable because I haven't had to experience that exact type of thing or that type of thing at all. And I can understand that maybe it takes you out of the story, but I mean, to me, a story in at least a lot of stories should be about perspectives that are not your own. Why would I want to watch something or read something or whatever that just every time is appealing to my perspective, when there's so many other perspectives that are, I don't know. It just blows my mind to think that you would not at least be open to being like, well, what's it like to be this person? What's their experience?
Right.
Honestly, though, I'm not entirely sure that applies beyond the surface level anyway, because, well, going back to Luke Skywalker for a moment, Luke Skywalker is nothing like me, other than he is white, and I was the age that he was at one point.
So that's
our experiences. Everything. There's nothing else in that character that I can relate to.
Exactly. That's the point. Is there's nothing else. So you put yourself into all the empty space of the character. That like there's not enough specific information for him to really be like anybody.
Yeah, it's just it's interesting that some people find it harder to connect with a female character or a black character in fiction than they do someone completely different from themselves.
Right. I have a funny story about that in Star Trek Discovery. My spouse, the character that got them to like the show, was Saru, who is the big alien guy. Like, no, what about that is in their life? They are neither big nor an alien.
Well, I mean, it's another example that seemingly wouldn't make much sense for me is Data being a character. Like, I related to Data more than
a lot of people did
any other character. Of course, now I understand it's because I'm on the spectrum, and that Data represented that for a lot of people on the spectrum watching Star Trek. But other than that, I'm not an android. Like, I'm not. I mean, it really just depends on the angle that you identify with in a character, and if it challenges that angle that you're traditionally used to being able to identify with, or if it just is asking you to identify with a character or empathize with a character without such an easy, an immediate connection. Like Michael Burnham, Discovery. I couldn't really relate to anything about her when the show started. I was on board to see where it goes, but like the first episode or two, I was like, man, she's fucking up. She's, making a lot of
I could empathize with her as just a walking disaster.
Right. Yeah.
That was my connection with her, is just like, wow, you're as bad at life as I am.
But now 4 seasons later, she's, in my opinion, one of the best characters on TV.
Yeah. I like her a lot.
She represents a lot of things that I understand, agree with, empathize with, and well, of course she's evolved a lot too. But like,
yeah, she's had quite the arc. There's lots of ways we identify with characters, right? And I don't think that Ryan's way of how he does it versus other people is it has to be one or the other, right? Like, we're all different. Yeah. Like, I don't know that I see myself, and I grew up watching all these Star Trek shows longer than I can remember, and like I don't think I have a particular attachment to any of those characters as like seeing myself in that role. But I think I just sort of glomped onto the world, which I guess as a lifetime permanent game master kind of makes sense, because my primary hobby expression is telling stories and worlds and letting other people play the characters.
Yeah, I think it baffles me how people will go out of their way not to identify with a character, or to make other people try to not identify with a character, when the things that we identify with are much deeper than the surface level.
Right. And I think that brings us nicely into sort of my closing thoughts. So I know, Dane, you had something for the end, for the closing thoughts. So I'll let you go first before I go on my tear here.
Well, I think that Ryan was going to maybe started mentioning something about it too. And it seemed like we were probably pretty much having the same thought at the same time, that
sure,
the expansion of the umbrella of what the term covers, Mary Sue, which in this case is a very clear example of like it meant one specific thing, and then suddenly at a certain point, a very notable point considering the cultural context of what was happening, it blew up. It just suddenly expanded to cover whatever, and now it's continued to do that, where it really can just be applied to anything, but it is always applied to female characters, even whenever the same criteria apply to male characters.
Right.
But in terms of moral panics and these kind of forced adversity scenarios, Mary Sue then woke. We've talked about that before. The idea of what woke was originally is a pretty specific thing. And then, just the other day, we watched on stream a Fox News clip where they were talking about the power save feature on Xbox is woke.
God.
SJW, the precursor to woke, was like social justice warrior. Okay, I could see that being a specific kind of person. But then it just became, on the internet, becomes anybody who ever acknowledges,
any
systemic
issues,
oppression or gender, inequality or anything. And then there's CRT.
Oh God, that's a whole can of cans of worms.
To go back to one episode we've already done, Satan and Satanism. Yep. All the stuff we were taught, you taught me about with the D&D Satanic Panic. Really, that stuff had nothing. Even the things that they were conflating with are nothing like what traditionally Satan is about,
right?
Or Satanism. It's just like kind of fantasy, demon creatures or whatever. And then the last one is the shittiest one, and it's the one that we're still experiencing, is groomer.
Oh God, yeah.
Where it's become just like anybody that's even okay with trans people existing in some cases, you're like, well, you're grooming children. And it's just, I think, another one of those things we can highlight as a hallmark of a moral panic kind of thing.
Yeah.
The expansion of the term is really probably the most functional element of all this that makes it dangerous, right?
And I think part of the moral panic, to tie it in with the groomer stuff. So, groomer meant a thing, and now it means a different thing. And that change of definition changed the target. And I think Mary Sue works the same way. So indulge me for a second. I know you've been doing none of that so far. But it meant a character the author empathized with on a deep level, right? It's a self-insert character. It is putting yourself in the story on a deep level. There's a high degree of sympathy and empathy there, obviously. What it means now is a woman you don't empathize with. And how dehumanizing is that, not only to yourself and maybe real life women for some people, because a lot of people I know who use the term loosely and liberally are not exactly great to women, and also have trouble with relationships with women for some weird reason they can't quite figure out.
Well, that's incidental, just completely unrelated.
I'm sure that's unrelated. But from how you connect with fictions, just like if you can't empathize with a character in a story, you just think it's bad. You just think that the writing is bad. The problem is bad writing. Well, no, it's the problem is you've cognitively limited yourself to it. Only if I can empathize with this character can I connect with them. And that's such a shitty way to live and to experience storytelling, to be like, I have to understand them. I don't empathize with Optimus Prime. He's a fucking robot, but he's awesome. Like, it just feels really sad and shallow and like you're living in a box.
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually thinking about this, and because the one example that always gets brought up of, you know, the type of characters that they would want is someone like Sarah Connor, right? And that always gets brought up. Sarah Connor.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about it, like Rey starts from the exact same place as Sarah Connor, where it's like, what is like, because they're always saying, oh, we need a character with flaws, right? So what was Sarah Connor's flaw? Like, Cameron didn't really show any flaws. It was just like her life kind of like, you know, sucked.
Was upended.
Didn't you see when she had mashed potatoes in her apron?
Huh? Oh, it was ice cream.
Oh, that's what. Okay.
Wasn't it ice cream? I think it was ice cream.
It was one of the
But it was like she has a hard, like a kind of a hard life, you know. But then she has her time to relax, exactly like Rey. Like she kind of has a hard life, you know. She has to work her ass off, and she's not getting paid right? Like that was the opening scene of Rey. She's like, and then she chills, and we see Sarah Connor. It's like it's the exact same like opening, right? So
right.
Like, so when they're saying like they even come from the same like starting place. Like I don't know.
Well, if I can expand on that example a little bit, I mean, you're spot on. Like the quote unquote flaw in the character, which is what they're always saying these Mary Sues don't have, especially Rey. In both examples, the flaw comes in when the plot kicks in. In Sarah Connor's example, it's that she's like, I can't, you know, I'm not special. What do I have to do with this? I don't know how to, you know what I mean? Like she's very reluctant to do anything and doesn't. You know, and the flaw is different with Rey, but there is one that comes into play when the plot hits her, and it's that she doesn't want to leave Jakku. She wants to stay and wait for her parents, even whenever she leaves, and she's on this adventure with fucking Han Solo and shit. She's like, I still got to go back to Jakku and wait for my parents. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's she's looking for this connection as it expands on more in the sequels, that she's trying to define herself by who her parents are, and she doesn't feel like she can be a complete person until she finds her parents or whatever. That she starts looking for her parents in Han Solo, who dies, and Luke, who dies. And it's only whenever she kind of, you know, comes into her own and is like, I can define myself, that she gets past that. You know what I mean? So like, it really is, the flaws are contextual, circumstantial.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think I watched that with you, Morgan, that little clip of Mahler talking about Rey and how she's not impulsive, she's not blah 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 blah, and it's like these very specific ideas of what a character flaw is.
Right. She's super impulsive. What do you talk? She just runs off into the woods. She steals a fucking spaceship.
You can't boil a character down to, I think, Mary Sue or not. Essentially, because, well, the definition is so broad now, it could cover literally any character, male or female, if you want to apply that template. And the characters that people love from the past have exactly the same or very similar characteristics and traits and abilities to modern characters, but you're not applying that standard because you already like those characters.
Right.
Yep. So I'm curious how much this this video that I think maybe Perp has seen it too, and then me and Morgan watched some of. I'm curious how much it's gonna kind of support what we just talked about.
Hit it.
This is a clip from, I guess, Mahler talking about, rape. I don't know what video it's from. Who cares? But this guy is among the, if not the #1 content creators, people who push this idea of a Mary Sue, and in particular Ray. He's one of the main culprits. So this is his genius, explanation as to why.
So, to review, her literal flaws are: she wants to find people to love and give her guidance. She believes in the good of people even if they are evil. There is nothing wrong with this heavenly creature. No hardship or cross she has to bear.
You guys seeing any problems yet? Or
I'm so mad right now.
Is that it? Is that
that's
it?
not it. There's more. That's just, I'm just pausing there because there's so much more that I wanted to do a check real quick. And
I mean, the thing that stands out for me is put clips of A New Hope in there. Well, put the original trilogy actually, and apply just that last point to Luke Skywalker. He sees the good in people, even who are evil. I mean, that's Darth Vader, isn't it?
That's the plot of Star Wars, right?
He literally says in the text, "I see the good in you."
Right. It's not the subtext, it's the fucking text.
Here in the Wikipedia, it clearly says she's introduced as a scavenger who was abandoned on the planet Jakku when she was a child. So having no hardships whatsoever. I don't know where you can come with that kind of, it's
a lawless planet,
Wikipedia.
a lawless junk planet.
Right. Its sole crop is fucking destroyed spaceships.
So yeah, we'll continue on. Maybe it gets better from here. Hold on, let's be receptive, guys.
I'm gonna need some whiskey after this.
She's not greedy, prideful, self-centered, emotionally stunted, emotionally unstable, selfish, reckless.
So, and this is, I benefit of the doubt. I don't know that he edited this. If he did, he's stupid on several levels.
He's fractally wrong.
Even the characters that are shown when he says those things are not accurate, or are just a very reductive, limited view of those characters.
Yeah, I mean, to describe Sarah Connor as reckless because she gets caught in between the first and the second film.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole point is that she's incredibly calculating, not reckless.
Well, so just to, I don't want to make this about EFAP or anything, but I've been seeing a lot of their fans and stuff lately saying things, and I saw a conversation with one guy where they were talking about some show or something where a guy who's a career criminal, he robs houses or whatever, he gets caught in a house or something whenever when the homeowners come home, and he has to get out of there, and he leaves something behind. And one of these fans, these people were saying that's unrealistic, because if he's a career criminal, he should have had this planned out to such a degree that he couldn't make a mistake. And I'm just like, these people don't understand reality or humans or anything, do they? You know what I mean? It's really just this ultra high standard, impossible fucking standard of perfect human beings or something.
Yeah.
Except they don't want that. So
they see it as mathematics. That's why the most simple ones are always saying comic adaptation, movie. What, copy exactly. Don't change race. Don't change this. Don't change that. It's this weird mathematical way of looking at things. I don't know how else to describe it.
That's
just
a really good way
form.
of putting it. Yeah, that it's formulaic, right? They just want to see the equation play out, right? They don't want anything new.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like if you were trying to view art the wrong way, that's what you would come to.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing is, everything he said about Ray there, again, can apply to Luke Skywalker.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, if some of them I just think are not even accurate at all, or completely reductive, but Yeah, we'll continue on. He maybe takes a turn and becomes more convincing. Who knows?
Overconfident, naive, blinded by love, womanizing, stupid, psychopathic, self-righteous, narcissistic, inexperienced, overly ambitious.
And then, again, I have to stress, I don't know for sure that he edited this, because goddamn if he did.
If he edited this, he's a fool. If he didn't, his editor's trolling him, right?
Well, I mean, it's possible that this was a clip taken from a video and then some fan or something
okay.
put this together. That's possible. That's like my being as charitable as I possibly can be.
And again, they still all apply to Luke Skywalker, who is none of these things.
Narrow-minded, morally ambiguous.
Narrow-minded. That's what Calvin Candy is.
Or arrogant. She has no vendetta, addiction, superiority complex.
I really hope this is not Mahler editing, because to say vendetta and then show V at the same time is like
so fucking. Oh my god.
You're kidding. But yeah, so you get the idea. It doesn't get any better from there. I'm sorry to spoil it, but it really does.
Damn.
Bloodlust, jealousy.
Bloodlust is how you describe Anakin Skywalker.
Oh man. This is like copying that Star Wars review, you know?
Yeah,
which one?
Remember the Star Wars review? And I don't know if it was the Phantom Menace, the RLM one, obviously.
Oh, Mr. Plinkett?
Yeah, the Mr. Plinkett.
One,
yeah, remember when he was like, he wasn't Marty McFly, and like he would just mention, and then it would just mention directors. Like,
oh
it's
my
all
god,
like,
that's true. Yeah,
just copying your shit, man.
I'm gonna look that up and see what we can. I don't know. There might be something there to explore for comedy's sake.
Comparing and contrasting comedy.
I never even considered it, but yeah, that's.
Well, I mean, that's what this stuff is. Is like it's kind of this aped version, but missing the point of Red Letter Media.
I got that. What I meant is I never considered comparing the two directly.
No, I'm not saying you specifically. I'm just saying that's generally what this genre of YouTube content is. It's like the Red Letter Media, we're the ground zero for it. And really, I haven't watched it in a while, but I don't think I'd really have any problems with this Force Awakens. I mean, Phantom Menace review. It's supposed to be comedy to a degree, and he makes fun of himself. Mm-hmm. And somebody was pointing out recently, I think Charles, he actually criticizes the filmmaking, and he explains, certain. I'd have to watch it again, but there's more
issues. Yeah,
there's more substance to that than just talking shit on the movie, and saying I don't like this.
I think Perp hit it earlier. It's formulaic, right? They're just copying a formula. They just want to see the formula play out, even in their own content.
They want to repeat the thing that they latched onto the first time.
Yep.
And they want to recreate that, and that's really what all people want to do when you create art or whatever, right? Like, I mean, you, as they say, nothing original and to do anymore or whatever. And it's like, because everybody takes what connected with them, their inspirations, and they kind of, recreate it into something new. Hopefully, transcends the original. This definitely doesn't transcend Mr. Plinkett of all things.
Not even a little.
So then there's, it doesn't get any better. It just goes on and on. And he continues saying really silly things. But what I found in looking into this stuff was not just a whole lot of content about it, by the way. Like, there is a lot of content about Rey being a Mary Sue.
There's a ton.
It's disturbing how many people just need to tell you how much Rey is a Mary Sue. And repeat it and break it down into, so it's understandable that there are a lot of younger people, sadly, that probably think this way because they came up on YouTube. Yeah, and this is the content,
And I hope they're here listening and realizing, hey, you've been done dirty, but now you can grow and do better.
But I have one more clip that I think might kind of give us a little insight into how they are viewing the idea that she's not flawed, or what they think a flaw is, right? And this is something that it personally is something that I kind of get frustrated by, because it's something I had to you know, and my personal life and my personal journey had to confront and understand in a new way in order to grow as a human being. So this is some interview that Daisy Ridley did. And this video was uploaded, just this section of this interview, as like proof that she doesn't think characters should have flaws at all. And I saw that and I was like, wow, that's a bold statement. You know,
claim, Cotton.
Wow, she just thinks no character should have any flaws. And then I watched it, and she kind of does say that, but we'll see what she's saying here. And I think it's revealing.
Besides her longing for her family and parents, what would you say is another weakness for Rey?
I do not think that is a weakness. Great question, but I don't think it's a weakness. So yeah.
Do you think she has any just kind of inherent weaknesses or...
I mean, I don't really believe in weaknesses in people.
Okay. I like that outlook. It's very positive.
Because I think you can't sort of decide like what's good and what's bad in a person. Because everything makes the whole. And the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, as we know. And I think those things, I for sure think people can work on themselves, like with things like anger and jealousy.
Right.
Maybe things like that. But that's workable. That's not something that's fixed, that can't be changed. You can, like, work on that.
Okay.
And I don't think she's those things.
Okay, fair enough.
So,
beautiful. Yeah, wholesome content.
And I understand what she means. Now, there's a time in my life, probably a decade or so ago or less, that I would have maybe seen it closer to how the person that uploaded it, you know, like, no, there's some people are just have weaknesses and weak character and weak this and that. And it's like, but when you really think about the language she's using and how, you know, she's being pretty specific in what she's saying, it's the look, you know, if I would have limited myself to what I thought my weaknesses were a decade ago, you'd never have heard of me. You know what I mean? Like we wouldn't be here. And so it really has a lot to do with how you're defining weaknesses and what you are settling with. So like, yeah, she really made a good point. And
yeah, and that's her whole philosophy in life. And people have taken this and put it on a character. No, see, she even admits that her character's flaw. Like, no, dude,
No.
You completely like. She gave that interviewer like gold. Like she gave her her whole life philosophy, not just like a character thing. That was beautiful. I love that.
Well, and then it becomes like, how are we defining flaw and weakness, right? Because she asked her about weakness, but the uploader called it flaws.
Yeah.
And that there's really different things. A flaw is like and that's what she was expressing, is like it's just a defect that can't be fixed or whatever. And it's like, that's, you know, just not I don't know.
You can always work around it, but you got to put in the time and the work. And when you're talking about a character in a story, especially a character you're portraying, it helps you portraying them, and it helps the story for that to be in motion, right?
Well, if I can bring it back to a Star Wars analogy, the Death Star had a fundamental flaw in its construction, whereas the Millennium Falcon had a lot of weaknesses that could be fixed.
True.
Wow. Fuck yeah.
Nicely done.
That's actually really, really good.
You used the Force for that one.
Yeah. Don't fuck with the Jedi Master over here.
You know, and also it's a flaw that is contextual. Had they not gotten the plans to the Death Star and found that would never have been a flaw, right? So it really just depends on the context of whether something is relevant, and or if you just need a really easy plot device so you can blow up the big enemy battle station.
Well, not only that, it's entirely subjective as well. As far as the Empire were concerned, they weren't aware of the flaw, but it was a flaw to them. But to the rebels, it wasn't a flaw with the system. It was, yeah, exactly.
It was a feature, not. I mean, once we get to Rogue One, it's literally a feature, not a bug.
Yes. Well, yeah, exactly.
True. A lot of the stuff that we've looked at so far are issues that, you know, arise from conditions that, you know, like when we talked about the comics code and how, you know, in the 50s, kids were becoming delinquent at a higher rate, at an alarming rate, when a lot of that had a lot to do with, you know, post World War II, you know, alcoholism among families, men who had been to war, you know, and the fact that in the 50s that we were trying to paint over all the problems and pretend this is a perfect life. This is the way culture should be forever. It's great. And not addressing any of the real issues. It just only creates bigger problems down the road. You know, kids weren't just becoming delinquent, obviously, because of comic books. It was because of the material conditions they lived in, and that they weren't being, you know, nurtured in a healthy way in a lot of cases, or in a lot of abuse. And yeah, of course, that's going to present problems.
No, I think that's a good. I'm gonna build off that a little bit, but like, it's easier when things are tough, right? And I would say for a lot of people right now, myself included, things are kind of tough, right? A lot going on. It's easy to glomp onto a problem, and I think one of the common threads we see with the moral panics we've covered on this podcast is that there's people who don't want other people to do things differently than they do, and then making that everybody else's problem. Because it's not like, so I'm going to give some of the Comics Gate people the slightest bit of credit here. It's not like people like Mahler are going out and making movies, right? They're not going out there and doing Star Wars fan films of how they would do it better, right? They're just sitting back, complaining about it, saying it's a problem, and raking in YouTube ad revenue and Patreon dollars. They're not actually creating anything. They're using that formula, and they're just printing money off that formula of panic, right? Of like, this is a problem. We're not going to sell you a solution, because then we would have nothing to panic about. And we saw that with, you know, the D&D stuff and with the video game stuff, especially, where it's like, you know, we're doing this for the panic, right? We just want people to listen to us and do what we want, and we're going to make it somebody else's problem.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, yep. Nothing to add. No notes.
Thank you. I think that's...
Yeah. And with that, friends, I have to actually get going.
All right.
Yeah. Thank you. Little movie
for coming, Perp. Little movie.
Happy
Perp.
to have you
awesome.
on.
But it was fun.
We need to do the old hero villain shenanigans.
I think we do. It's going to be a smaller list than usual. I'm going to say the villain is the entire media panic complex on YouTube and elsewhere.
Sure.
Because they're lazy. At the end of the day, they're just copying Red Letter Media's style, but without any of the thought, expertise, and nuance. And literally just making the same video over and over again, because people who are in a panic need to be validated, right? They're having a panic. They need something to latch on to. And that's why these people are successful, is that, like, they've got people scared, and they're selling a solution without a plan, right? There's never going to be, what are we going to do about it? It's always, look at what they're doing.
Selling a problem without a solution.
Yeah, that one. It's not just that they're wrong, because we're all fucking wrong about all sorts of things all the time. It's that they are committed to being wrong in the laziest way possible for a buck.
Yeah, it's you know, and there's a whole dynamic at play that I would say you're not wrong to say that it's that culture, but also, you know, it takes two. You know what I mean? You have to be somewhat willing to feed into this stuff, and not willing to, you know, check your like, just step back and go, wait, I've been watching this content and they're just saying the same thing for like 3 years now or something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
People watching that long, just like, how do you, how, like, you know, Dane, I love your content, but like, I don't watch every video.
Oh, what? You're fired.
Oh,
No, it's
good luck.
I wouldn't expect anybody to. No, please don't go. You don't ever have to watch a video ever again. Please just do this podcast. It becomes more of a club, a community that is, the one thing that ties it together is ridicule of the out group or what they see as the out group even, or otherization. And, that's the thing that holds it together more than anything. And that's why you end up with, hours long, streams where it's all just, as I've said before, justifying your opinions in retrospect. You have this knee-jerk feeling or opinion based on all the things generally that we talked about today, but you don't. Maybe on some level you just realize that it's not necessarily rational, so you have to justify it
somehow
ad hoc. Yeah.
So another villain, and we mentioned him briefly, and I hate him. As much as I hate anyone I don't actually know, is Rick fucking Berman. This fucking guy. If you don't know about Rick Berman, I would look into him. I don't think we'll cover him directly on this show. He's not really
Renegade Cut.
Renegade Cut has a very good video on him. Good call. So speaking of Star Trek, we should talk some heroes.
Yes.
I am actually going to credit Paula Smith, the person who wrote A Trekkie's Tale, the creator of the term Mary Sue, as a hero here. A little weird, right?
No, I mean I see like it's she's expressed her fandom in a new way that's heroic.
Yeah, and I think that for a long time, that in a way that we talked about with that middle definition of Mary Sue that came from 2005. Like, it was a constructive term in a way, right? It was like how to write better. Here are things to avoid in writing a fan fiction. And her story being a parody of all these fan fiction tropes in the early days of fan fiction is probably how we got a lot of writers over the last several decades. So, like, props to her. Good work.
Mm-hmm.
Shame about your character being misused by assholes, but that's not your fault.
No. I mean, it was never meant to be that, right? Like, it was never meant to be someone else's thing that is then taken and used that way. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and then the other hero I want to shout out are just the fucking Trek fandom. Like, there is not a geek community today if there wasn't Trek fans circulating the tapes.
There wouldn't be conventions. There wouldn't be, science fiction probably wouldn't have been mainstreamed to any degree, really. Yeah.
Like, if you have a problem with how Star Trek is now, know that those people and the people who have carried the torch for that franchise over the decades are why you're into this nerd shit to begin with. And you know what? It might help you to go back and just pop on some classic original series Star Trek, or read some old sci-fi, because it's wild. And know your roots as a geek. Not that you have to, but even if it's bad or doesn't hold up to modern tastes, it's good to see the history.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's this idea of ownership when you don't even understand what it is you're trying to own and where it comes from. And it's like, it's especially egregious with Star Trek. But I mean, it's similar to as like Marvel, for instance, with the, where they're putting social politics in there, like X-Men, man. X-Men.
X-Men. I mean, even, your Superman video is excellent about the history of Superman, just like perfect.
If I can add a hero, that came up during this episode, and I think it's important. John Wick.
John Wick.
Fucking, this guy has gone. How many people has he murdered because they killed his dog?
It's a lot.
And fucking more power to him. Keep murdering those motherfuckers, John Wick. We love you, brother. Well, on that note, we should thank our muse, my muse, for this podcast. It's become something way more just better and more exciting and deeper and more profound than I would have been able to do on my own, thanks to you two guys in particular.
Thank you.
But without the inspiration of one Ethan Van Sciver, this would not exist. And therefore, we have to thank him every episode.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, it's like saying grace at dinner. You just need to do it. I mean, I don't, but like, this is my version of that, because Jesus, like, how would I have known that this was something worth exploring had he not responded to my videos where I talked about, Comicsgate, Red Scare and stuff, and just solidified my mind. Yeah, okay, there's something there. So here we are. It's almost like he's the Adam, is an Adam and Eve to this podcast. He is our progenitor.
This podcast is clearly an Adam and Steve podcast.
Clearly, obviously. Yeah. And we'll, Adam and Steve and Jim, and, we'll make it
right. We'll just keep it going. So, yes, I will thank Zod for Ethan Van Sciver.
Yep. Thank the gods. Anyway. Anything you wanted to end with, Ryan, or anything?
No, I think you've covered everything absolutely spectacularly, as usual.
Well, thank you. I mean, you contributed quite a bit as well, and we appreciate that. So
thanks to Perp for being here as well.
It's really fucking cool that I've got, like, good friends that are good people and smart and observant and I'm pretty lucky, I think.
I have a quote to close on, and I think it fits coming to this from talking about a industry built on tearing down people and fighting against empathy. And that comes from Star Wars, from a certain Jedi Master and Sith Lord named Kreia. And that quote is, "To be united by hatred is a fragile alliance at best."